Hi, today we're talking about new products and what they're good for and whether they're really worth the money. So join me and we'll talk about one I found just recently. And welcome back to the Shamrock Quilt Studio. Hi, and welcome back. When it comes to making bias tape, we've got a lot of choices, and sometimes they don't always work for the project we have in mind. For example, recently I worked on an applique project that you may have seen here, Miss Kelly. And Miss Kelly had some stems in it that required a 1/4 inch bias tape. And it needed to be made out of the fabric that was chosen for the project. And it was a bit of a challenge because there are many ways to make bias tape. There are pressing bars where you create a tube of fabric and then you stick the bar into the project and you press it. Well, mine seemed to have gotten on their bias and rode away. But that's how they work. The problem that I found with those was they were not accurately a 1/4 inch. They tended to be sewn at a 1/4 inch and the bars were a 1/4 inch. But when you put the bars inside the fabric, it stretched it out. And then pressing it, because the bars weren't flat, when you pressed it, they weren't particularly flat. They had a bit of a puff to them. And when you took the bars out and pressed them again, they got a little bit wider. Then there are what I'm going to call the clover type bias tape makers. They look like this. And they work pretty well. This is an actual clover. And this is a knockoff. And I have a whole set of knockoffs. Let's see, this is the knockoff 6 and the clover 6. And you can kind of tell, especially there at the end, that they're not exactly the same. The knockoffs tend to have a bigger mouth where it comes out, and it doesn't make the bias tape uniform, and it doesn't press right down to 1/4 inch. The clovers do a much better job of staying accurate to the measurement of the bias tape maker. Now, the clovers are more expensive, the knockoffs are much cheaper, and there's a place for all of that. It just depends on what your budget is and how accurate you're trying to be with your bias tape. I want to show you this too. I also bought one that is a extra large bias tape maker. It produces a 1 inch double fold bias or a 2 inch single fold bias tape. And it says easily. I'll be honest with you, I haven't tried this one yet. But when you're working with a let's see, it wouldn't be 2 inches. I think you'd have to cut this fabric 4 inches. 3.5 to 5 inches wide is what they recommend. And usually I find going just a little bit wider is better for uniformity. But that's a 4 inch piece of fabric. And with a 4 inch piece of fabric, I could probably do it without a tape maker. But I wanted to try this, and I found it really inexpensively on, I think, Amazon. So that's going to be one of the things we're going to try this year. What I found for you today, and what I want to give you a little, some tips about, or what I found to be true about, is a different way to make bias tape. And I will tell you, I have seen this method done where you just folded paper and you were able to maybe get a piece of cardboard and cut it and fold it in a certain way so that when you ran the cardboard through, it would make a bias tape. But that's paper, and it's going to give and it's going to take and it's not going to last, and you're going to have to be making another one. But I found a set of bias tape makers that does something very similar to that, and I wanted to try it out, and I was fortunate enough to get this as a gift over the holidays. It is called an Applique Sasher collection, and it is for bias for applique stems and stained glass, and it is in the sizes 1/2, 1/4, and get this, 1/8. Can you imagine trying to make an 1/8 inch bias tape without some type of tape maker? It's got to be a headache, any way you look at it. So these came in, and they are made by Pauline Rogers, and she is she lives in Australia, and it says it was designed and made in Australia, so they were imported in. I think you can buy these directly from her website. I think this came from Amazon simply because of it was a family member who bought it. But her information is right there on the package, and we'll be sure to link that down below in the description of this video so you'll have it. So the package is a little clear package, and here's what it looks like when it comes out. It's on a piece of little foam, kind of like you find at the craft store, and then it's got the 3 bias tape makers, the 1/2, the 1/4, and the 1/8 inch. And one of the things that she is really pleased with, and one of her goals, I think, in making these is you don't burn your fingers on them. I have seen some of her videos where she talks about people who do knockoffs of her product, and she says that the pieces that you're using melt when they're exposed to the hotness or the temperature of the iron. And also, you tend to, when you're making them, either with the knockoff brand or without a bias tape maker, you do tend to burn your fingers, and I can attest that that does happen. So I just got these. I haven't had a chance to use them on a project, but I did a really quick test, and I was very impressed with it. I'm going to tell you how I did that and show you the results of it. But I started out with the biggest one, and that's the 1/2 inch. And it's just 2 little holes in the piece of plastic. You know, it says on here somewhere what these are made of. And I think that's the important part of why they don't melt, is what they're made of. And now I don't see it. Perhaps it was in the instructions or the description in purchasing them. But they don't melt, I can tell you that. And they're pretty easy to use. I started out with the 1/2 inch, like I said, and her instructions say, she does give you a nice instruction book and tells you exactly how to do it. So when we're talking about the 1/2 inch, she says if you require a 1/2 inch finished sashing, and she's calling these sashings, cut the fabric 1 inch wide, which is what we would typically expect. Now, something a little different in her description is she asks you to start by folding both ends of that fabric into the middle and pressing about a 1 inch place on the fabric. And that's how you get started. And then you're going to put that section that's already pressed up through the piece and then down again on the other side. And what worked best for me is to pull it out just so that the little tail was just sticking out here on the other side of it. And then you put it down. And of course this one's already made, but we're just going to pretend like I'm doing it. You're going to get it hot there, and then you're going to press it. And then once that fabric comes on the other side of your iron, there's really no good way to show you this. You're going to put your iron here, and there's a little indentation in the template which helps you. But once that comes out, then you're going to take this, and what she recommends is she recommends pinning it. And she asks you to use, what did she call that, a fork pin? Excuse me while I look, because that was something I was not familiar with. I think yeah, use a fork pin. And I think what a fork pin is a pin that has two pointed surfaces. So you're able to catch that material on both folded sides. And then when you pull it apart, when you pull the template down the fabric strip, those two pins are going to hold it and try to keep it from getting twisted. So at that point, you put your iron down, your fabric is attached to your board, and you can simply just kind of guide it with your left hand, maybe if you're right-handed, and then pull it down using the iron to push the template along. And I could do that really quickly because, like I said, this one's already done. So now you've got it here and you've got these two pins. You pull those two pins out. And depending however long your ironing surface is, you could go as long as you wanted or you can go small sections. This was just like a little 5-6 inch piece that I did. It did really, really well. This was just a scrap that I pulled out of the closet. One pass through, once I got that start there at the beginning, it worked really well. That's the 1/2 inch. Then I said, we're doing good, let's try the 1/4 inch. So I tried the 1/4 inch, same way. Here's the little end that I pushed through. It looks a little crazy there. It looks like a spoon almost. But once it got through, then I was able to iron it and go all the way down. And there's the 1/4 inch strip. I don't know if it's going to sit straight for us. Let's pin it down. But you can see that much, that's probably a good, I would say 5 inches, where I got a perfect 1/4 inch bias or sashing. And that's the 1/4 inch. Now, the 1/8 inch, wow, wouldn't that be nice if that worked? Well, I have kind of both positives and negatives about that. First of all, try cutting a 1/4 inch strip and then trying folding it in on itself. That was a trick. So if you're going to use the little tiny one, cut a longer piece than you think you're going to need, because that starting was kind of rough. But then once it got going, here I've got like a little 3 inch section where it really did well. And then towards the end, it got a little off kilter the way it was going in. And it didn't do so well at the end. But there was a section in there where I got a perfect 1/8 inch bias tape. And let me check that real quick because, gosh, we hardly have markings on our rulers for 1/8 inch, but it is 1/8 of an inch. It was kind of impressive to me that it would work. And one of the, and here's the piece, one of the tips that she gives on here, and she fully admits that the 1/8 inch, how does she phrase it, can be a bit fiddly and some fabrics may not work. And I definitely see where that comes into play. If you've got a fabric, I think, that is very soft and pliable, you're going to have a little more problems. I would definitely recommend giving it a very light starch before you start, so that would be a little bit of help. And then she also says that if it doesn't work or you're having problems there folding that little piece under, to back up, cut a 1/2 inch strip and make the 1/4 inch, and then put the 1/4 inch through the 1/8 inch tape. And you know what? We're going to try that here. I've not tried it before. Don't know if it's going to work. I don't have any tips, but we're going to see what happens. And what does she say? And then put the 1/4 inch folded piece through the 1/8 inch sasher. Okay, so I don't know if she intends for us to fold this again or not. I'm going to press it really firmly. Let's see what happens if we don't. If we come up through the bottom, this is like opening Capone's vault. If you're old enough to remember when that came on TV and nobody really knew what was going to happen, and they opened it up and there was nothing there. But I think what we're going to do is we're going to just kind of fold it in half, just so we get kind of a pointed end. Let's do that first. Give it a little bit of a press. Bear with me. Like everybody, I'm not great at performing live. So we'll see. Okay, we've got it through. And we're going to hold this here. We're going to press it. It didn't press at 1/8 of an inch on this side. But let's put our pins in like she recommends. And let's see what happens. Now this little iron, it gets pretty hot. It's up as high as it's going to go. And getting the fabric through that little 1/8 inch template, you got to really work at it because there's a lot of fabric going through a little tiny hole. Let's see, we're almost through. I think in general, if I were going to rate this with stars, I would probably give this Sasher kit a good 4 or 5 for the larger ones. The smaller one, that might be its weak point, is that small one. And it is very aggressive to get that. What ended up happening was the 1/4 inch just folded in half. It didn't fold in again. But you could use that. If you needed a little tiny bias strip, that definitely would work. You just have to be careful when you adhered it on, either through some type of applique glue or stitching, that you caught the top piece and not the bottom piece only, or it would flop open on you. But it would work. I think you could definitely work with that and accomplish what you needed. I would hope that it's pretty rare that you would need an 1/8 inch, but there certainly would be opportunities that you would. So I'm going to give this, I think I'm going to give it a 4. I'd give it a 5 if the 1/8 inch worked as well as the other two. But definitely a 4 is great, and I think it's going to do a better job of creating a longer piece of bias, because you're forcing all that fabric into that, and you're able to keep that iron on it right as it comes out of the template, and while the fabric is still under the template. And that's what's going to keep that bias tape folded very firmly for you. I hope you've enjoyed this. Like I said, I think this is available both through her website, and also I think we were able to find it on Amazon. So if you would like to check that out, I'll put the links below. And if you're working on a applique project or something that requires some bias tape, this might work for you. And again, here's the front of it and the back of it. Thanks for joining us here today, and we'll see you next time at the Shamrock Quilt Studio.